So this March I saw a lot of movies, mostly because of the quarantine and also because film is generally the art form that I connect with the most. So what I want to do is to quickly run through the movies that I saw and loved in March in no particular order, ignoring the ones that I didn't love because I don't really have anything engaging to say about those movies. I just want to talk about the movies that I saw and really connected with, and maybe pique your interest and have you check out some of these movies. So here we go. I started the month off with Alita Battle Angel, a collaboration between Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron as director and producer respectively. Now I didn't really have any interest in watching this when it came out. I really didn't like the promotional material and I had never watched the anime or read the manga it was based on before. So it just looked like something that wasn't for me. However, there seems to be an overwhelming amount of love for this movie online, to the point where I began to wonder if it's just the producers of the movie creating fake accounts to generate buzz for their film. However, the number seems too large for that to be plausible, and I decided to check this out and I ended up really loving it. Now, to be clear, it's not a perfect movie, it's not a masterpiece. There's problems with the writing, the structure is poorly defined, and the whole thing feels very incomplete. There's, however, an effort to make up for that with character and spectacle, and I felt like the film very much succeeded in those areas. The visual effects are some of the best of the decade. The way they're used in the action scenes feels very unique and well thought out. It's definitely not something that you can say you've seen done a million times before. Also, the technical work on the character of Alita is just jaw-dropping. Despite being computer generated, she feels like an authentic part of this world. At no point did it feel like she was floating out of the screen. Honestly, it's unnerving just how well they can integrate CGI into the real world. I was genuinely surprised by just how much I enjoyed this. So check it out if you haven't. I followed up Alita with something less grandiose, something more intimate. I watched Shoplifters. I found out about this movie by following the work of the director. I had seen Still Walking and had been completely blown away by its restrained style. It felt like an exercise in watching life happen, avoiding heightened drama and simply observing these characters interact in their current situation. I know that doesn't sound very interesting, but once you settle into it, it's an experience like no other. Shoplifters is very much in the same vein as Still Walking. It's about a low-income family that gets by mostly through shoplifting. They even lift a child. The film is crafted in a way which has you following these characters through their day-to-day activities, with the intrigue coming from the small details that you learn about them as you go along. At some point, it begins to feel like these are people you know, people you're familiar with. That's however until the film takes a major turn in the third act. I won't spoil what happens, all I'll say is that it really changes your view on these characters. Not that it makes you hate them or anything of that sort, it just adds a whole other layer to them and you kind of feel like you didn't even know who they were before that point. It's a really incredible story that provides an intimate look into an unusual family dynamic that society very sadly doesn't seem ready to accept. Upstream Color. This is a film by writer-director Shinkaruth who gave us Primer, and much like Primer, this is a really difficult film to follow. It demands your full attention and doesn't attempt to hold your hand. That's all worth it since it tells a very compelling story, be it in a very unconventional way. It's also just astounding to see how much was achieved in making this movie with a measly budget of $20,000. We have movies with catering budgets bigger than that. Now I can't say much about the film since it's something that requires multiple viewings for a more comprehensive breakdown, but it's worth your time. I also saw the 1999 film Go, directed by Doug Liman of Edge of Tomorrow fame. This was just a fun time. It's definitely trying to be as cool as Pulp Fiction, just not as profound, and that's okay. It didn't really need to be profound or meaningful. Sometimes you just need something that's entertaining, and this was it. The characters are fun, the storylines intertwine in an interesting way, and by the end, all I could think of is just how much I really enjoyed that. Plus, it has Sarah Polley, who I really love. Another movie I saw and loved was The Raven, a 1940s French film whose French title is, if you can pronounce that, good for you. I won't embarrass myself by trying. It's directed by Henry Georges Clouzot, most famous for The Diabolics, and though this is not as perfect, it came quite close, at least for me. Basically what happens is that someone starts sending letters around a small town spreading poisonous rumors and suspicions. The film then has us watch these people get driven into desperation and begin to turn against each other as they try to uncover the culprit. It also questions the way we as a society perceive certain people, whether it's religious deities, old intellectuals, or even women. By the end, even though the mystery is solved, there's still a feeling of impending danger given how much chaos was orchestrated by such simple means. It's a really great movie, and if you enjoy well-crafted mysteries, this one you'll love. Another movie I loved this much was 12 Monkeys. Now, this wasn't my first time watching this movie. I had first seen it when I was in high school. Back then I had never really watched any Terry Gilliam film before, so seeing 12 Monkeys for the very first time was quite an experience. An odd experience. I found it messy and confusing, so much was happening all at once, and it felt like the film had no focus. This was especially prevalent in the asylum sequence, where I had no idea where this was all going or what in the world Brad Pitt was talking about. So in short, I really didn't like it the first time. But then time went by and I got to see more Terry Gilliam movies, loved them, and decided once again to revisit 12 Monkeys, and this time around I really loved it. I found it very engaging and creative. Every shot in this film is full of details that feel like they were labored on for hours upon hours. Also, having seen Vertigo, I got to appreciate some details that had gone over my head the first time. Terry Gilliam to me feels like the kind of director who hates conventional modes of filmmaking and is always looking to bend the medium in new and interesting ways. Nothing in this movie feels generic or cliche. It's always going in interesting and unique directions and dazzling you at every turn. It's definitely the most unique performance we've ever gotten from Bruce Willis, and it just might be his best. Of the movies I saw in March, this was simply my favorite. Next, I saw Cross of Iron from director Sam Peckinpah. Now, I'm not really a big fan of Peckinpah. I find his editing very distracting, which is the main reason why I really couldn't enjoy The Wild Bunch. But I really liked Cross of Iron, his movie about a German platoon in the Second World War. His editing style definitely worked better for me in this one. There are surreal moments in the film that I found extremely effective in the way they conveyed certain feelings. The most notable one being a scene where our main character has just had a concussion and everything around him feels like a fever dream. It also has a really spectacular ending, that's all I'll say. Then I saw the classic Japanese horror Onibaba. As far as horror films go, I found this to be extremely unusual and unnerving, in a good way of course because I loved it. It's one of the best movies I've seen all year. It's shot in this really high contrast black and white, which makes the images look like something straight out of a manga. They're very striking and each one of them just looks like it took a whole day to get the composition just perfect. It's an extremely atmospheric and intense film that doesn't attempt to censor the brutality of its subject matter. I was also just surprised at the amount of sex and nudity it had for a movie of its period. It's however all done in good taste, nothing gratuitous. And despite just how crazy and strange it is, it still feels very grounded in reality. The brutal nature of the story feels like something that would actually take place in the real world given the situation. The characters feel like real people reacting to a desperate circumstance. That to me added a lot to the horror. You feel like all the terrible things you're watching take place can actually happen to you. Next is something much less intense but very heavy. I saw To Live, the 1994 film from the director of Hero. To Live is an epic that manages to feel very intimate. The best way I can describe it is that it's a movie about life. When you start off, you see one of the characters painted in a bad light, but as it goes along, it becomes clear that he's just a person. He makes mistakes. The same goes for all the other characters. There's no villain in this story, there's just people. The film covers decades in the lives of its central characters in solid rhythm. You're never bored, you're always wondering where time will take these people next. With that, you also get some very heart-wrenching moments in between. The film doesn't hold back when it comes to depicting tragedy in its most raw form. I'd definitely not recommend watching this if you're in a very emotionally sensitive place in your life. Having said that, it's a very beautiful experience that leaves you feeling like you've lived a life with these people. It's definitely the most moving film I saw all month. The Guard. This is a British dark comedy about a police officer investigating a series of murders. It feels very light compared to something like To Live, and I had a lot of fun with it. Gleeson and Cheadle are good in it, they have great chemistry, and I enjoyed the overall story and what it says. I really don't have much to pick apart in this other than it's really well shot, it's clever in the way it talks about certain issues, and it's very funny. Check it out. I also saw The Man Who Knew Too Much from the 50s, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, which just happens to be a remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much from 1934, which was also directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Having now seen both versions, I'd say that I much prefer this one to the original. It definitely shows just how much Hitchcock grew as a director in the years between and feels like a much more ambitious take on the material. The characters are much more fleshed out and the set pieces are executed in a better fashion. The most significant improvement was in the opera sequence. You can tell that the work and detail that went into it was really extensive. It makes for a very suspenseful experience. It really reminded me of the opera sequence in Mission Impossible 5, and I wouldn't be surprised if it served as an inspiration for the filmmakers. Floating Clouds. This is a movie I'd never really heard of before till I watched an interview with Martin Scorsese where he refers to it as something that brought him to tears, and so I had to watch it. Finding it was difficult, but I eventually did, and after watching it I just thought it was incredible. It's about these two former lovers who try to rekindle an old romance, but the state of things around them just makes it difficult. Instead, they end up making each other miserable because neither can find what they are looking for in the other. They are still holding on to the memory of the passion they once had for each other and can't really grasp the fact that they are both in a different part of their lives now. The love might still be there, but the passion is all gone. They're just left wandering in melancholy. If 12 Monkeys was my favorite movie that I saw all month and To Live was the most moving, Floating Clouds is the best movie that I saw all month. You can tell that the story is coming from a deeply personal place and it's handled with so much authenticity. As far as love story characters go, I'd put these two up there with In the Mood for Love and Blue Valentine, characters that are just so beautiful because of their flaws and it breaks your heart. Next, I saw The Little Foxes from director William Wyler. Now, Wyler is just one of those directors. You see one of his movies and you can tell that the man was born to make movies. His talents in blocking, framing and driving great performances are just unrivaled. This is one of those movies you watch and can't look away from. Every scene has a solid focus point and there doesn't feel like there's any fat that needs to be trimmed out. Nothing feels pointless or pretentious, everything is done to captivate you and tell a compelling story. You definitely understand who these characters are without being force-fed anything. It's mostly done through clever blocking and effective visuals. I've always been a big fan of Bette Davis and I feel like she gave one of her best performances here. She's done some incredible work with William Wyler and I recommend you check out all their other movies together. Sansho The Bailiff. To put it simply, this might be the saddest movie ever made. It's directed by Japanese director Kenji Mizoguchi, a director known for his affinity for exploring deep human suffering in his movies, and this is considered his masterpiece, so you can imagine the emotional turmoil. Their story is about two children who are separated from their mother, then sold into slavery. Their mother is then taken and sold to a brothel where she's forced to become a concubine. The rest of the movie is a display of decades-long torture and suffering. Luckily, we don't get any gory scenes showing this suffering, but the method the film goes for, I'd argue, is much more effective in showcasing the torture. Everything is done out of frame or off screen. When a slave disobeys the master, they're quickly carried out of the shot and all you hear are violent screams of terror, which does a lot for the imagination. Their story covers 10 years of this, and these characters' lives are completely destroyed by this way of living to the point where they can hardly recognize each other. Now, if you're watching this and thinking that this is something you don't want to put yourself through, I completely understand. This is not a movie you watch for fun. It's extremely emotionally draining and your mind can only take so much. It's, however, extremely beautiful and tender in places, and I think it's something worth giving your time to. I followed that with Mrs. Miniver, another William Wyler film, and while this is not as good as Fox's, it's still a pretty good movie. The acting is good, the direction is good, and I enjoyed it. Now, this movie was made when the Second World War was starting, so it paints a pretty good picture of people's attitudes towards that war at that time. It's something that's very culturally significant, and if you like history, you'd benefit a lot from this, while also being very entertained. And finally, to finish off, I watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. This is another Terry Gilliam movie and I think it's definitely one of his best. It carries the same qualities as his other works. It's very entertaining and endlessly creative. You can tell that there's a lot of time and effort put into the shot composition and overall visual artistry. The whole thing is supposed to look and feel like this endless acid trip. It's a film that goes from fun and hilarious to incredibly uncomfortable. You start off with excitement in the earlier parts of the film. You enjoy watching these characters in their wacky hijinks as they get twisted on drugs, but as the film goes on, it starts getting uncomfortable and things get more intense. Before you know it, it starts feeling like you're in hell and you're never getting out. It's not fun anymore. The characters are also just with you the whole time. They're desperately trying to escape this nightmare that they've sunk themselves into. And just when it seems completely hopeless, when there seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel, you're out. Just the way you came in.